this. Great. Waiting for a few more participants to trickle in here, but thank you for attending.
We should be outside doing this.
Definitely.
Yeah, beautiful day.
Yeah.
You need a hat, Perry.
I do. I got sunburned the other day just being out for a little while. So
did everybody see the little pop-up for consenting to being recorded?
Yes.
Yep.
Don't worry, that's just for our panelists, by the way. So, all right, everyone. Well, we'll have a few more trickle in, but we'll go ahead and get started. First, thank you for joining us for our webinar, Splurge or Square? Are you spending enough money? Should be an interesting conversation today. We're going to cover a few awesome topics, I think. Really quick, a brief introduction. Most of you probably know us, but just in case. We have AJ Tebow, Certified Financial Planner, Managing Partner at Conestoga. He's been an advisor since 1995, and he founded Conestoga in 2010. We are also joined with Jim Schockman, fellow co-founder of Conestoga and Certified Investment Management Analyst. He's been an advisor since 1987. Perry McLean also joins us with over 30 years of experience as an advisor. And finally, myself, Connor Hartman, financial advisor at Conestoga since 2016 after graduating from Duke University. We're going to go ahead and start talking about spending today. So, you know, spending is it's a loaded topic. You know, at first glance, it's pretty, I guess, simple enough, the idea of spending money for things that you need or want. But when we stop and think about how we actually decide to spend on things, there's a lot of emotion that actually goes into that, and a lot of things that are almost below the surface. And so we're going to try to dive into that a little bit and just rely on some of the experience that we have here. We've got decades of experience of working with people and conversations about spending. So really high level, you know, are we spending enough? Are we spending too much? Why do we spend the way that we do? Some big influencers on spending, and then we're going to wrap up with a few ways that we have found that are helpful in balancing how we spend money and trying to almost think about it in a healthy way. So cueing it off, not spending enough. You know, there's a lot of reasons why, but we actually see this very frequently with clients that we work with, especially those who are retired, I would say. Guys, somebody want to chime in here and have a few thoughts on the subject?
Well, I can start off by, you know, saying that this has been very relevant to my own situation. I'm going to be turning 65 this fall, and you realize at some point in time that you have more life behind you than you have in front of you. And I've been a good saver all my life, so I've accumulated a good portion of assets. And now the question becomes is, what do I want to do with all those savings and all those assets? And I had to actually make some real conscious decisions about increasing my spending and enjoying my life. I have no intention of being the richest man in the graveyard. So it's very difficult, though, when you've been a good saver all your life, to turn that switch on. And that doesn't mean being a wasteful spender. It just means giving yourself a chance to enjoy the fruits of your labors throughout the remaining parts of your life. So it is a conscious choice that it's difficult for some and easy for others, but it's something that it's important to look at.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right on, Perry. You know, first of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for joining us today, and I hope everybody is staying safe. I think the value of money is not the paper. And this is what Perry was talking about. I think it's what it can do to foster the well-being of you and the people that you love. One of my favorite movies, probably of all time, was called "It's a Wonderful Life," and on George Bailey father's office wall, there were some words that were framed, and it said, "The only things that we can take with us are the things we give away." And so I think it's, I've never seen a U-Haul behind a hearse, and so I think it's important to enjoy your money and make sure it really enhances the well-being of you and those that you care about.
Oh,
Yep. Perry, you could adopt me if you want.
I was thinking the same thing, Perry.
I've heard that from a lot of folks. So, not that you're not all deserving, but I'm of the ilk that I'm interested in leaving the legacy that I have behind. I've actually chosen a number of different institutions for that, since I don't have children of my own. One thing you find is that, in my experience, when someone goes on to the next life and they leave money behind, you can inherit a lot of problems from the inheritance. So that's something to be mindful of.
But I think what it boils down to is, we run across retirees it's a fear of running out. It's a fear of running out of money because there's no more ways to replace it.
yeah. It can definitely lead people to be apprehensive about spending, even if maybe they've got the means to do it. But, on a higher level, I think people who have enough, people who don't have enough, their spending is on track or not. There's a lot of people who do feel really guilty about spending money. There's studies. We have some statistics up here, but and it's basic things a lot. It's not like people are feeling guilty about going out and splurging on something extremely expensive most of the time. It's the little things that people tend to feel guilty about, even if it maybe isn't warranted. Kind of interesting how that works.
I think part of it, I've always, or not always, but I've tried to, in the latter part of my life, look at the value of money, and I tend to equate it to my life energy. I have to work for my money at some point, and I have accumulated some money. So the energy that it takes to earn the money, or the effect that it's going to have by reducing my savings, is really important. Am I really interested in spending the life energy that I have left in spending money on things that are frivolous or I don't want? So it kind of depends on what your belief is in money. Some people spend money very liberally, but I try to look at, and I don't mind spending money now especially, but I try to keep it in measure. It's like, if I'm going to give up this money, is it worth the life energy that's put out there to earn that, or to keep that available for something else?
Yeah, I think old habits are hard to break. If you're used to never spending money to all of a sudden start spending, it's not that easy.
Absolutely.
And I think it's a balance, saving too much versus spending too much, or even in retirement. Is the balancing point is how you feel about the present while you save for the future. If it's keeping you from living your life the way you want right now because you're only looking at tomorrow, then you might be saving too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, there's definitely a balancing point. Making sure you're living for today, but not forgetting about future you. There's some other statistics here that we have that we found kind of thought-provoking in a way. What do you think, Jim? What are your initial thoughts?
Well, my first thought is that I don't think women are alone in this. I think I would guess that men could be just as think the same way. Money's not something that people find pleasant. I think women probably do a better job at thinking about things that are life and death. And personally, thinking about your own mortality can be useful in helping us to focus on what really matters. I think the point here is money stuff is confusing for really many otherwise brilliant people. It's generally not on the top of the list. It's up there with getting a root canal for many people. And I think, eventually even the best of us will look foolish. That just comes with the territory. And I think ignoring these things have the potential to create even bigger hardships down the road. So I think we have to look at it. We have to think about it. And not looking at it, it could be an issue.
There is some generational effects too, I believe. I know that in my parents' generation, it was almost considered not polite to discuss money. That was something you didn't really talk about, especially with other people and in public. I think those ideas have changed somewhat, but we are overcoming for some people some cultural and normative things that have changed during the course of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, Denise and I occasionally will think about our kids, and we have two older kids that really remember the lean times or the difficult times, and they tend to be today the ones that are more spenders. And our youngest, who really doesn't remember the lean times at all, she's the saver. I mean, I can still see her checking and savings account, and I know how much she sets aside, every 2 weeks when she gets paid. So trying to figure these things out, I'm not sure that there's any rhyme or reason.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think the fact that people are sometimes predisposed towards almost like, I would say, guilt, or feeling like they can't talk about something, or they don't want to talk about something related to money. Sometimes that doesn't lend itself very well to the younger generation. I mean, it's a lot easier to see someone spending than it is to see someone saving. It's a lot easier to see the new car in the driveway than it is to see the digital bank account that's slowly growing over time, at least for a younger person. It's kind of an interesting.
Yeah, I think our culture perpetuates that too. It's we all, especially nowadays, you look on Facebook and everybody shows their best self, and you see them standing next to a new car or a jet that maybe they just saw at the airport and went up and got a picture with it. So, there's a lot of pressure, especially on younger people.
Can you speak to the new car issue, AJ? I think that.
Well, it's sometimes it's about the experience, right? It's
Yeah. Well, and not everyone is in the boat of, not spending enough. I mean, there's plenty of folks who find that they're just struggling to, to not spend too much, and it's an easy thing to fall into, and there's lots of reasons why. One of the big ones is, wanting to, like you said, Jim, it's kind of in our culture a little bit to want to, see what others are having, and they're posting nice things on Facebook and social media, and they, we want that too, right? We're a little bit envious, maybe.
I think, over the years, I've experienced many different couples, met with many different couples, and, occasionally you run across, and some that have been married for many, many years. And you still run across people that have separate bank accounts, or they share expenses, they assign expenses to each other. One person covers the mortgage and the other person covers the utilities. And I think, for some people that kind of an arrangement works, especially when you've got maybe one that's a saver and one that's a spender. But I think in any situation, and I've seen these types of situations end a marriage in some cases where, it turns into, usually younger couples, it's your money, it's my money, until there's that communication and understanding that both people are contributing. You might have one person that's out in the workforce and the other person that's at home taking care of the kids and the house and all the domestic things. And, I think there needs to be that communication Particularly with large purchases. What's a large purchase? For some couples, it might be $200. For others, it might be $2,000. I had a situation where a husband went out and bought a brand new $2,000 gun, and his wife wanted to shoot him with it.
It seemed like a very good thing to disagree on.
Well, and also, if those are our guests who are Washington residents, under the eyes of the law, it's a community property state. So there technically is no yours and mine, it's ours. And if you've ever sat in front of a judge that dissolutions a marriage, that's what you'll find. So it's important to get on the same page about money, because there is no ours in Washington. I mean, there is no yours, mine. There's only ours, excuse me.
Or you could, my wife, there's two categories. There's hers and then there's ours.
I get that a lot too. What's yours is mine, and what's mine is mine.
Yeah. And, part of spending too much sometimes too, I mean, I think it's really safe to say that there's a lot of it's just built on habit, falling into what's easy. I mean, it's true that my wife and I could dine in every night and never go out to eat and probably save some money doing it. But sometimes it's easier and just plain nicer, especially when things are open, to be able to just be waited upon and have someone else prepare things for you.
There's nothing wrong with treating yourself once in a while.
Yeah. But finding that balance, like you said before, AJ, that's a big part of this. So
yeah, I think it comes back to well-being. What adds quality to your life and what doesn't. And I think that should, as much as you can, try to make that a conscious choice and be mindful of that.
And that's a communication issue between you and your significant other, that you get on the same page about what's important to each of you. And if you need to make compromise about things, then that's what you do. But until you talk about how your money is being used and what you're using it for, you're going to have a very difficult time, because you're going to be playing a guessing game as to who's doing what and why. But if you're talking about how you're spending your money and what you're going to need to retire on and how you're going to do all that together, if you are a couple, then you're going to be far more successful in probably navigating your budgeting and your spending of money.
Yeah, great point, Perry. Yeah. So speaking of spending, a lot of it I found, it's not just about I just said habits beforehand, talking about some of the things we fall into, but sometimes there's things that we didn't have really a chance to fall into the habit of. They were just things that we grew up with, and that was just what was there, and that's what we had to almost form our spending from. I mean, how our parents were approaching money, or how much money we had growing up. I mean, that makes a huge difference. Like you said before, AJ, I mean, maybe it's not going to affect us the way that we thought it might, but it definitely does affect us. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Well, sometimes when it comes down to some legacy issues, you're going to find, and I've done enough work with different families where if you're leaving money to certain children, they are very judicious about how they receive the money and continue to be good savers and use it to help promote the longevity and of their financial success. And others will burn through money very quickly. And so those are other issues that become important. And from a planning perspective, I've seen it happen in many cases where a dependent has received an inheritance and it's gone within a year. And it's almost a shame, because in many cases, the person who receives the inheritance might not have been of means, and they have an opportunity to establish themselves quite well, but yet they burn through the money, and then other children can be great about it. So it's really, and those of you who have kids, you can probably really identify with that. And you mentioned that earlier, AJ, about how your children are different about money. So
Yeah, I one of the stories that kind of sticks in my head that somebody told me long ago, that if whatever people are before they get money, they just become more of it. So if you're really good with money, and you have a good relationship with money, then you become a better person. If you don't have a good relationship with money, or you're a jerk, you usually become a bigger jerk. And I've even seen cases where people get money and it really ruins their lives. Literally, people die if you have a drug habit, or if you have bad habits, they become bigger bad habits. So I think it's real important to be mindful and put some pre-thought into this, because nobody wants to be responsible for bad things happening to the people we care about.
Huh. Yeah, that's a good point. Good point, Jim. Besides I guess the story that we grew up in, the things that kind of formed the framework for which we learned about money, there's also these key moments. I mean, I'm sure all of you can attest to clients who have gone through a big money moment, so to speak, and it's changed how they've looked at money or how they've seen money. What do you guys think?
One thing that I was taught early in my career was the concept of pay yourself first. We all have a budget of some kind. Some of us don't pay much attention to it, but there's always bills going out at the end of every month. And I was always taught that make yourself one of those bills that get paid right off the top. I mean, you pay your mortgage or your rent or your utilities and your insurance and those kind of things. And then you kind of figure, well, what's left is maybe what I'll save. And if you put yourself in the number one position of that and decide that you're going to save some of your money right off the bat, you pay yourself first. And that helps when you're getting a promotion or you're given a gift or that kind of thing, that helps, consistently helped you become a better saver and a consistent saver, because it's really about consistency. It's not necessarily about windfalls or lots of money necessarily. It's just being consistent throughout the process of your life.
Yeah, I think one of the most dramatic events that anybody can experience, especially somebody that's retired but not necessarily just retired, are related to healthcare and prolonged illnesses. And these types of events can be the equivalent of a physical, emotional, or a financial wrecking ball on your finances. And anybody that's gone through this understands that it's really, really tough. And it's oftentimes, if it isn't planned out properly, you might have enough money to get the first person through the healthcare event, but by the time you get to the end of it, there's nothing left to take care of the other person, and they become much more destitute, along with the emotional issues that come along with trying to take care of somebody you love and care about.
I think events can have an impact too. It makes me think of some clients years ago. They're both retired school teachers in their late 60s. And teachers, generally are very frugal and good savers. And he was a just avid runner, very, very healthy guy. They both drove very modest vehicles. And one day he's running and he felt something weird in his chest. So, after the fact, a couple of days later, he got it checked out, and turns out he had like massive blockages in the arteries of his heart, and ended up immediately having quadruple bypass surgery. And he was in the hospital for quite some time. And the first thing he did when he got out of the hospital is he went and bought a brand new Mercedes convertible, because it was his dream car. And he wouldn't have done it if it hadn't have happened.
Yeah.
So do you need a bypass, AJ? Is that what happened to you there recently?
Well, again, it's about experiences.
You
Yeah,
know,
there's nothing wrong with nice stuff. It's just being mindful and making sure that it really does enhance your well-being.
yeah.
You should feel good.
I can speak to a money event that I remember my mom talking about when I was only 3 weeks old. My grandfather actually unexpectedly passed away. It was my mom's dad, and right like from that moment, she even noticed that she totally shifted gears. It went from very much saving for tomorrow to being much more aware of living for today. And moments like that, I mean, it can definitely change your perspective on life in general, let alone your spending. So I mean, money is a byproduct of that. But so kind of moving along here, so how do we balance our spending? What are some things, some takeaways that we can um, learn, I guess, from our experience working with clients and being advisors? I think the first thing, the big thing that we've already been touching on is creating a plan first. AJ, maybe you could talk a little bit about what that can do for us.
Yeah. I think, it's important to have goals, both for the present and the future. And then it's important to monitor them. Are you meeting those goals? And particularly important in retirement, everything that I read and listen to, the most advice that people get the most satisfaction about spending their money, especially in retirement, is on experiences. Experiences last more than a lifetime. Mark Twain said, 20 years from now, you'll be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you do.
Yeah, and I thought, when I hear that, I think, well, what if you jump off a cliff? But I guess the reality is if you jump off a cliff, you won't be around to remember it anyway.
I guess I can attest to that a little bit personally, because in the last, I hadn't done a lot of traveling for pleasure in my life prior to last year, and I did a lot more traveling last year before COVID, and I can't tell you how enriched and how joyous it was to do that, and it's something that I'll never forget, and I have absolutely no regret about doing that. So, and that may be a function of age, certainly, but we are a culmination of our experiences, and if your experience is just getting up, going to work, taking care of your kids, going home and going to bed, there's a lot more out there in life than just those things.
Yeah, like experiencing a nice new car.
Exactly.
There's a common theme here. How about that? So, when it comes to making a plan too, something that we help a lot of people do is we can kind of figure out and get as granular as people want how sustainable is the spending? How much are you spending, and is that something that we can continue to expect to do? Or are we going to have to make changes? Or is there room left to spend more if you take into account all these things that we look at when we do the planning process? There's a lot of variables, a lot of levers to pull. And if you don't do the planning, then you can kind of find yourself almost shooting in the dark, wondering, am I spending too much or not? Is there something I'm not thinking of? That's, I think, where we can really, that's one of the biggest things I think that we can do is just planning to avoid worrying and being anxious about spending money.
Yeah, I think it's been. Go ahead, Perry. Sorry.
Much of it is just a math problem that we can help you figure out. I mean, obviously, if we knew the exact day that you were going to expire from this life, we could plan it down to the dollar, but we can help you to determine what those kinds of issues are with how much you're going to need and how much you're spending. Part of it is on you as the client to also get a handle on what your spending is. You talk to some people and there's too much month left after the money, and you've got to do a little bit of work on your own, but it's not really that difficult. And sometimes it's just a matter of kind of looking at where you're spending your money, whether you're writing it down for a period of time to see, oh gee, I didn't realize I was spending $300 a month on Starbucks. Now maybe that's what you want to do, and that's fine, but for folks who are wondering where their money's going, it's just getting to keep track of it. And I guess they call that a budget, which is the next slide. And that's a nasty word for many folks. So.
Yeah, I think budgeting is a, it's not, for my wife, it's kind of a 4-letter word. She calls it a 4-letter word. But I think, there aren't many times in my life where I've regretted actually having a plan. I'm always concerned that it's going to somehow mess up the spontaneity of life. But, if you have a plan, I think that just leaves more time for spontaneity. And I think that the really being mindful of that, thinking about, what a good life would look like for you, and are you spending it on the things that really matter? I think it goes back to what I said earlier about well-being and mindfulness. Mindfulness I think is really just simply taking the time to think about what brings you and those you care most about joy and meaning, and focus your resources on those things.
And for retirees, it's most important because in most cases the earned income has stopped. There's income sources and there's withdrawals from assets. So it's important that we track those spending trends, even though nobody likes to hear the budget word. But we can, we'll have conversations with clients occasionally and say, hey, your average annual return has been 6%, but you've been spending at 8% rate, and that's just not sustainable.
Yeah, and I think there are some people out there where, if even just the idea of a budget makes them want to run away, I would say still going through the exercise of figuring out where your money is going so that you can be mindful, like Jim said. I think that just knowing where it's going alone is a really helpful exercise. I mean, it can really help paint a picture for you of whether or not you're living the life you want. I mean, I remember a client who said, I want to spend more on travel. But when we actually took a look at it, he figured out he was only spending 3% of his income on travel. But yet over 15% was being spent on Amazon, as an example. It wasn't matching up with what he said he wanted. And once he realized that, he was like, I got to make a switch. This isn't the life I thought I was living. So,
need to spend more on experiences.
Yeah.
One thing, AJ and I have had the pleasure of having many conversations with clients, encouraging them to spend some more money. And I'll tell you, as an advisor, that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, to encourage your clients to be able to enjoy some more experiences and enjoy the fruits of their labor, versus having a conversation that says, well, if you keep spending like this, I don't know what the last 5 years of your life are going to look like, but it's not promising. So, yeah.
Well, the other side of that math too, that conversation is, hey, you've been averaging 6 or 7% a year, but you're only spending 1%. Right. So who's going to get it? Yeah. I think someplace, I'm not sure if it's in another slide, something about if you don't spend it, your kids will.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's a good point, AJ. Yeah, it's a really good point. I think that actually paves the way for this last part, which is potentially communicating with your family too. I mean, not only with maybe intergenerational transfers of wealth, like you just said, someone else spending their money, but even in the here and now, having conversations about money, that's probably one of the most helpful things that I think we've seen. Just being open and communicating with each other and trying not to pass judgment if you think someone is not spending the way they ought to, maybe, but being open.
That's one of the things that I know AJ certainly stresses in the planning process is intergenerational communication. So if those of you who have grandkids or children or somebody that needs to be, I don't want to say educated, but just brought into the loop of what's going on, that's important, and we're happy to help you with that and help you start and engage in those kinds of conversations, as opposed to just getting the phone call that says, oh, grandma died, what do I do? Which is not necessarily the best way to do that, coming from experience either. So again, feel free to use us as that conduit to have those kinds of conversations in a way, and we'll certainly do it in a way that's based on what your desires and wishes are, but also getting through to make sure that your objectives of what you want, your legacy, who you want it to pass to, and how you want that to get done. So that's quite important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Perry. Yeah, I think one way to cause a family feud, probably the best way, is a dead relative and money. And so what I encourage people to do is have a conversation with your family so they don't fill in the blanks with their own imagination. Sit down with everybody and tell them what you want to do. Tell them why you're doing it so they don't think that you had some ulterior motive. The other thing that I recommend to people, if you want to give your kids or grandkids a gift, is just pay to have them do a real financial plan. And they don't have to have money to do that, but that'll help them to kind of map out. And I think it can make a huge difference over the long term. Just getting that education, knowing a little bit about what the future might hold.
Jim, do you have any suggestions about where to get that plan done?
Well, Connor can do it. A certified financial planner or somebody that has some experience in planning. But and it just so happens that Conestoga Wealth Partners is that's a primary driver in our practice here is planning. And I think it's the best money you could ever spend.
Shameless
It's the
plug.
old story of give a man a fish and he eats for a day. Teach him to fish and he eats for a lifetime.
Well said. Well said. Well, we're just wrapping up here, but a quick last idea. One of the most, I think all of us can speak to this, but I think that one of the best, most valuable things that I've ever done spending wise is when I get behind a cause of some kind. And so I find that there's a lot of value there, and people are glad that they spent that money a lot of times when they're giving to someone else. And actually studies show that when you give or you spend on behalf of someone else, you tend to feel way less guilty about it no matter what it is. But if it's a great cause, these are some of the causes as an example that our business supports, that Conestoga actually gives money to. It can be a really rewarding way to spend money.
One thing too that a lot of people might not know is that those of our retired clients who are in the mandatory distribution phase, that a donation or a gift from your IRA account, your taxable IRA account, counts against the distribution, but doesn't count against your income. So if you're philanthropic and you don't want to have your income go up because of your distribution every year, you can give part of that distribution to a charity and not have it affect your income, which is something that not a lot of people were aware of, but you are now, I guess.
That's a good point, Perry. Yeah, and there's a lot of science that backs this up too. In studies of well-being, giving to someone else really does a lot. It's not always that easy to do, but once you do it, I think most people feel pretty good about doing it. And I think there's a lot of organizations in need out there.
Especially now, that's for sure.
Any last thoughts there, AJ?
No, I think we're about at time.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope this is helpful for you. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. Sometimes our ramblings will create a question or something or a thought that can be helpful, and by all means reach out to us. We'll also have a replay made available if anyone wants access to that. Thanks again for attending, and we look forward to doing future webinars with you guys. And our panelists, thank you very much for helping us out and sharing some of your knowledge. And we'll see you next time.
Stay safe.